Saudi Arabia, as I just mentioned, has gone to the debt markets, and they raised $10 billion in their first Eurobond sale this year. The offering comes after Gulf debt sales slowed last year. I mean, it slowed to a trickle. Bloomberg's Simone Foxman has more from Doha. So, Simone, a pretty strong reception from investors, yeah?
Yeah, some $35 billion in orders for this $10 billion raise, so well oversubscribed. And, you mentioned that there was a trickle of debt issuance last year. Saudi Arabia was really the dominant force there, 6 times more than the next sovereign issuer. Some $18.5 billion raised last year in comparison to the next QIA was at about $3 billion. But let's talk about this issuance. Yields have fallen over the past couple of months, ticking slightly higher in the last couple of weeks, but we're roughly where we were in terms of September. There's these ongoing question marks about what happens to interest rates between the U.S. and then, of course, around the world. But Saudi Arabia has so much to do, so many expensive projects, whether we look at NEOM, whether we look at Riyadh, whether we look at the other developments around the country. And that may be why it is getting into the market, coming in with the first Gulf sovereign issuer this year, even as some of its peers staying on the sidelines.
And then inflation in Egypt, the data came out and it was up again. I think the more potent news came through from the IMF with them warning that Gulf aid is going to be crucial for the country. What stood out to some of the economists you've been speaking to?
Yeah, well, I mean, their belief here is that inflation is only going higher, and we saw much higher inflation print out for the month of December, 21.3%. That was up from 18-19% back in the month of November. Now, there's 2 real stories here. One is the devaluation story. We saw the Egyptian pound weaken substantially, really in late October. It's done so again earlier this month, but that not playing through into last month's data. And that's what we can see here in this GTV Go with inflation in the white, the exchange rate in the blue, the weakening currency. But the second piece is food and beverage costs. Yes, we're seeing some of the cheapest wheat prices in the world since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. But Egypt is not feeling that. They're looking at food and beverage inflation of some 37.2% on a year-on-year basis. Farouk Sousa says, he's Goldman Sachs, a friend of the show, says, devaluation, where the currency goes, that's his top watch for this year. But of course, the IMF coming out and saying they want to see that Gulf money that's been promised to Egypt coming through so it doesn't have a balance of payment problem going forward. We'll see what exactly materializes this year. IMF projecting $6.7 billion, far short of what's been promised over the next 3 years.
Mm-hmm. And then to politics, Iran's judiciary has made more high-profile convictions amid ongoing anti-regime protests. What's the latest?
Yeah, there's 2 sides of this. One's the international side. We saw a Belgian aid worker. He'd been working for the Norwegian Refugee Council, Olivier van de Castile. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison plus 74 lashes and a fine, apparently on charges of espionage. Belgium not happy with that. The EU not happy with Iran, both for its crackdown on some of the demonstrators as well as for the involvement of Iranian drones in the war in Ukraine used by Russia. On the other side, we're looking at a domestic front. The daughter of a former president, Ali Rafsanjani, she was a lawmaker herself by the name of Faiza Hashemi. Excuse my pronunciation there. She's been arrested. She's been convicted for 5 years on national security charges. There's other things pending. The AEI, American Enterprise Institute, has a critical threats program that's tracking what's happening in Iran. They've talked about fewer protests recently, and they say, watch the enforcement of hijab laws. There's lots of women going around without hijabs in protest of government policies. That's what kicked off this whole protest movement. But they say they're seeing signs that the government is going to increasingly enforce this. So that's the one we're going to be watching going forward.